right, narrating Nick Fuentes, part 2. Big things and small things, the inverse difficulty curve. Inverse resistance. Counterintuitive, decisive actions can face less friction than incremental actions because they change the landscape before the fence can coordinate. Small actions invite maximal procedural entanglements precisely because they remain within the system's rules. The state can tolerate minor damage and will use it to full legal mass to reverse it. In politics, a first step is often interpreted as the outer boundary of your real capacity. Observers assume you are already pushing as far as you can. Therefore, what you do first becomes its practice what you will do most, after which you negotiate down. Therefore, what you do first becomes in practice what you will do most, after which you negotiate down. When the first action is modest, every subsequent interaction becomes a retreat from that modesty. Lawsuits, delays, and procedural appeals are not incidental. They are the operating environment. The initial action becomes the ceiling, and the system's response is to turn the ceiling into a floor. The administrative branch. Law is a stack of paper. The paper stack. The contemporary rule of law often functions as rule by accumulated paperwork. When law becomes a room-filling stack, it stops being legible as principle and becomes legible as procedure. The state becomes administrative by default because its law is essentially operational doctrines for bureaucracies. Sovereignty's confession. To accept that every executive decision must be pre-cleared by a hostile judiciary is to confess the executive is not sovereign over its own instruments. The lawsuit becomes not merely a dispute, but a constitutional inversion. If every move is preempted by litigation, governance becomes a negotiation with the courts as superior. Constitutional mirage. In an administrative regime, constitutional language persists as ceremonial cover for managerial reality. The presidency remains a symbol, while the bureaucracy persists as the operating system. The executive sits atop the machine, but does not fully command it. I'm narrating Nick Fuentes. Check out my art at zukagallery.com. Like and subscribe. Schedule F, the Leviathan, reduction versus redesign. Reduction without replacement. A reduction in force that preserves the machine's governing logic does not change the regime, it trims it. Seniority rules, union constraints, and procedural protections ensure that a cut is metabolized as bureaucratic event, not as political rupture. The system reconstitutes itself by hiring, reclassification, and reallocation. Regime change in practice is measured by how many operators of the old order are removed and replaced by loyal operators of the new order. Without displacement at scale, reforms remain cosmetic. A handful of removals produces headlines, not structural reorientations. Every attempted redesign confronts three categories: things the old regime should not have done, things it failed to do, and things it did wrongly but necessarily. Effective change requires not only cuts but also spin-ups, new functions, new staff, new authority lines. Without spin-up, you merely hollow a machine that will be refilled. The Rubicon and the lawfare horizon, the irreversible entry, the wet toe. Once you step into existential conflict, partial entry is punished like full entry. The subject imagines he can participate briefly and then exit. The system remembers him as a participant and schedules his processing accordingly. The toe in the river marks you as having crossed, regardless of how far. Lawfare is scalable precisely because it's a career ladder. If prosecuting a few dozen opponents yields prestige and advancement, prosecuting thousands becomes an industry. The system does not lack lawyers, it manufactures them by incentive. In an administrative regime, punishment is not necessarily imprisonment, it is time. The process is the penalty. Investigations, compliance reviews, hearings, professional licensing, threats, reputational quarantines. The goal is not always to convict, but to exhaust. When institutions can punish participation retroactively, electoral loss becomes not a policy setback, but an existential hazard for those who acted. The movement discovers too late that normal politics is a fiction maintained only while you are losing validity. Once you try to govern, you are reclassified as a threat to be neutralized. Apocalyptic rhetoric without apocalyptic action destroys credibility. Language becomes polluted. Audiences learn that revolution means minor staffing changes and existential means budget freezes. The result is cynicism that immunizes the public against genuine alarms when they finally become warranted. If elite communicators speak in civilizational terms while delivering administrative trivia, mass audiences learn to discontent the civilizational register itself. The message becomes, they're always saying that, and urgency turns into background noise. A movement can die of its own rhetorical compromising even while it wins small procedural victories. A government can increase intensity by 10 times and still remain near zero in historical effect. The internal perspective, Washington scale magnification, misleads actors into thinking they're remaking the world. From the external perspective, state formation and regime change, they all still operating within the old envelope. When the existing apparatus is structurally hostile, reform becomes less viable than replacement. The strategic move is not merely to cut the old machine, but to design a new one and migrate functions, assets, and personal selectivity. Continuity is preserved operationally, while sovereignty is reasserted architecturally. Even hostile regimes produce competent technicians. Replacement governance often requires hiring from the prior system, not because it is morally clean, but because capability is scarce. The central question becomes not purity, but command. Can these assets be subordinated to the new authority? The reboot is not destruction for its own sake, it is the creation of a coherent chain of responsibility. Without clear lines, who commands, who obeys, who can be removed, governance is theater. The reboot restores legibility. Decisions have authors and authority has consequences. Yeah, definitely. Unique. Yeah, that's true. Long collapse in the demand for reality. On 17th century failure, honesty is shock therapy, populism's limits, and the return of the executive will. This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. For forms of government, let fools contest, whatever governs best is best. Do not piss down my neck and tell me it's raining. The 17th century break, deep time failure. The most disorientating realization for modern political consciousness is not that things are broken, but that they have been broken for centuries. Monetary systems, legal doctrines, constitutional myths, and democratic rituals have been compounding their errors since the 17th century. What appears as recent dysfunction is often merely the late-stage visibility of long-embedded design flaws. Every generation is tempted to believe it stands on the threshold of final redemptions. Socialism, liberal democracy, technocratic harmony. The shock comes when reality intrudes and announces not only failure but antiquity of failure. Disillusionment deepens when the promised future turns out to be an inheritance of unresolved pasts. A usual heuristic for political analysis is to assume that any major system of ideas, finance, law, governance, education, has been malfunctioning since its canonical formulation. The assumption clarifies rather than distorts because it strips away the romance of novelty and focuses attention on structural persistence rather than surface reform. People respond viscerally to the sudden appearance of truth amid false consensus. As with hearing real rock and roll after years of polished radio pop, the effect is irreversible. Once reality is perceived clearly, prior narratives lose their emotional authority, even if they remain institutionally enforced. The moment of recognition this is real is aesthetic before it is political. It is felt in the body before it is articulated in theory. That moment cannot be unlearned, and it recognizes loyalties, tastes, and tolerances across entire worldviews. Mass culture trains populations to mistake polish for substance. When an older, rougher, more honest artifact breaks through, whether a speech, a song, or a leader, it exposes how much of contemporary consensus is sustained by repetition rather than conviction. Modern politics habituates citizens to the belief that there exists a simple lever, an election, a protest, a slogan that can fix everything. The repeated failure of this lever produces learned helplessness, not rebellion. People keep pressing the button even as evidence accumulates that it is disconnected. Actions that resemble power but produce no effect train submission rather than agency. Voting without sovereignty, protesting without leverage, and speaking without consequence all serve as simulations of control that prevent the emergence of real authority. The deepest fear of the managerial order is not chaos, but decisiveness. Anyone who speaks of actually pulling a switch, of making irreversible decisions, is treated as dangerous, childish, or insane. Stability becomes the supreme value precisely because it prevents accountability. The rarest political quality is not intelligence or virtue, but coherence. Leaders who are recognizably the same person on and off camera generate disproportionate trust even among critics. This coherence reads as honesty because it cannot be faked at scale. A politician without a discernible off-camera self is not merely untrustworthy but unreal. When no one can imagine who a leader is in private, the public persona collapses into a mask animated entirely by institutional scripts. Contrary to elite assumptions, blunt honesty does not repel voters. It clarifies stakes. People tolerate harsh truths more readily than soothing falsehoods. What they cannot tolerate is being treated as children while being governed as liabilities. Populism excels at naming what is wrong, but fails at specifying what must replace it. Opposition alone cannot govern without a positive architecture of power. Populist movements exhaust themselves in protest cycles that end in absorptions or defeat. The problem with literal democracy is not merely incompetence, but fragility. The modern mass lacks the attention span, discipline, and coordination required for sustained rule. It behaves not like a sovereign, but like an overgrown child, emotive, distractive, easily managed. The empirical record of populism over the past century is failure. Even when it wins elections, it loses control of institutions. This pattern is not accidental. It reflects a mismatch between democratic energy and administrative reality. What people mean when they say they want democracy is often simply to be governed competently. They do not crave participation in process, they crave outcomes. Safety, order, prosperity, governance that delivers these feelings of legitimacy regardless of formal structure. The executive who governs effectively behaves less like a symbolic representative and more like a chief executive officer. Authority is exercised decisively, responsibility is centralized, and success is measured empirically rather than rhetorically. Perfectionism is fatal to governance. Every real decision produces collateral damage. Systems that wait for moral purity before acting guarantee paralysis, and paralysis guarantees decay. When aristocratic and democratic capacities collapse simultaneously, societies drift towards monarchical solutions by default. The question is not whether a Caesar will emerge, but what kind of Caesar. The central political challenge is not to imagine a perfect ruler, but to design institutions that bias towards competence and away from madness. Systems should be built to select for Augustus rather than Caligula, knowing that variance can never be eliminated. Historical moments of exceptional governance often coincide with deliberate succession mechanisms rather than hereditary accidents or mass elections. Continuity of competence requires intentional transfers of authority, not romantic faith in chance. The final stage of political maturity is recognizing abuse without accepting its euphemism. When citizens learn to identify warm rain for what it is, legitimacy collapses faster than ideology can repair it. Reality does not arrive gently. It arrives as a sequence of pills, each harder to swallow than the last. Things are broken. They have been broken for a long time, and no simple fix exists. Maturity begins only after the pills are swallowed. Once illusion fails, the only remaining question is whether societies will choose redesign or decay. Denial prolongs comfort, but accelerates collapse. Clarity shortens comfort, but opens the possibility of renewal. Clarity shortens comfort, but opens the possibility of renewal. Clarity shortens comfort, but opens the possibility of renewal.